O dabar išpildom 3 karaliaus norus. Prenumeruojam, sekam ir spaudžiam patinka.
Dar vienas video, kur Petersonas čia gan naujesnis. Čia labiau kalbėjo su tuo žmogum, bet gan ramiai šnekėjo tikrai, bet vėlgi čia nebuvo jam priešpriešos, kaip sakant. Čia tiesiog paprastas pokalbis su žmogum, kuris kaip būtų techniškai jo pusiai. Tai turbūt ir nematysim iš jo agresijos ar panašiai. Tada žiūrėsim dar vieną iš naujesnių video. Čia paskutinis, man atrodo, paskui gal pažiūrėsim dar kažką. Bet tas naujesnis video, kaip sakant, irgi iškarpa biologically determined gender differences in baby chimps and children.
That the gender side is more socialized, and I'm not so sure about. You said that the gender side is more socialized, and I'm not so sure about that. I think this separation. I mean, I'm not unsure about it either, because culture obviously matters. But a lot of the differences that you see from individual to individual are at least 60% biologically determined. So variation. So if you're born, let's say, as a male with a female temperament, so you're high in agreeableness, empathy, and you're low in negative emotion, because that's the typical female pattern, about 60% of the variance in that is attributable to genetic factors. So we could have a sex and gender split, as the political types insist, that's also grounded in biological differences without making a categorical distinction. So
absolutely, they always remain connected.
Kodėl? Ar man vienam labai weird lūpos? Jos į apačią šitaip nueina.
The reason that we have genders and that we have a duality of gender is because we have sexes. So people who say that gender is purely in our heads, is purely a society product, that's an impossibility. I think if we were a cloning species, so we had no sexual reproduction.
Aš galvojau, čia šešėlis gal, bet ne, jo, panašu. Labai weird atrodo, bet okay.
Where we would all be identical, no one would have come up with the concept of gender. So the concept of gender is related to sex. There is a certain independence between them, but they also remain joined at some point. And you're right, it is never purely cultural.
And you show that in your book, because and I want to go into it in quite a bit of detail. So for example, let's start with this: toy preference and differences in nurturance behavior. And so I'd like you to lay that out, and then we could talk about that psychologically for a bit.
Yes, it's interesting if you look at the behavior of the young primates and children, human children. You see a lot of similarity there, and often people, of course, think that the toy preferences are socialized that we see, but I think there's too much similarity with what we see in other primates. So young female primates, they are very fond of infants. They want to hold infants as soon as there's a newborn baby and the mother arrives with it. They surround her. There's very few males who are interested in that, but the young females want to get their hands on the infant. And in nature, we also know that they pick up logs and rocks, and chimpanzees do, and the young females, they carry them around on their back, on their belly, as if they have a doll. If in captivity you give them a doll, like a teddy bear, they will walk around with it and take care of it and be friendly with it, whereas young males, they have a tendency to take them apart, basically, and look what's inside. And so the females have this very strong urge to hold infants. And the same thing has been found in human children, that girls are more interested in infants than boys are.
Čia labai seniai jau study, kad moteris, vaikai, mergaitės labiau domina veidai, o berniukus objektai, tipo.
Then if you look at the young males have a higher energy level. This is also true for boys versus girls. They have a higher energy level. And what they love to do is roughhousing, mock fighting. That's what they do the whole day, basically. They like to mock fight with each other, sometimes with adolescent males, just to test their strengths on them. And so rough and tumble play also in human children, much more typical.
Neprisimenu, ar aš taip dariau. Aš suprantu, apie ką kalbu, apie tą tokį pretend mušimąsi. Aš visiškai negalėčiau pasakyti, ar aš taip elgiausi. Nepamenu.
Of boys and of girls. And the segregation that we see in the playground between boys playing together and
Male child, prie ko čia tai?
girls playing together probably comes to a large degree from the fact that the girls don't like all this roughhousing that the boys are doing. That's not their type of play, and so they stay away from them because it's too rough for them.
So I spent a lot of time looking at the play literature in children. So partly I worked with a team of investigators at Montreal who were interested in the origin of antisocial behavior. And this is partly what gave me a foray into your work, by the way. So the lead researcher there was Richard Tremblay, who's done a lot of great work on...
Oh, I know his work. Yeah.
You know his work. Yeah, Tremblay's great, man. And he was on this podcast, by the way. And I worked with him for 15 years, something like that.
Didn't he work with Fred Sprayer, who was also there?
Yeah. So he was interested in the origins of antisocial behavior and criminality, mostly. And while we worked together, we kept pushing back the origin time, in some sense, of antisocial behavior until the age of 2. And he had put a bunch of interventions in place to try to modulate antisocial behavior, but it's very, very persistent once it's established. Very difficult to ameliorate. And so there's a subset of 2-year-olds, about 5% of them, of the males, almost all male, who bite, hit, kick, and steal at the age of 2. Now, most 2-year-olds don't, but a percentage do.
Okay.
And most of them are socialized by the age of 4. And so that becomes either probably integrated into their personality rather than repressed. So maybe they're more disagreeable from a personality perspective, highly probable. They're more competitive, they're blunter, but they get socialized. And one of the key questions is, who socializes them? And my suspicions are in many cases it's a father or a father equivalent. In any case, the ones who don't get socialized, they aren't popular with their peers. And humans get socialized primarily by their peers after age 4. So they get to be little outcasts, and then they're bullies, and then they're juvenile delinquents, and then they're criminals. That's where the life course persistent criminals, that's the population from which they're derived. And so then we looked at...
Interesting. Tai tipo, kiek ten sakė, 5% tų, kur iki 2 metų spardo skandžias ir panašiai, ir jeigu jų nesocializuoja tipo iki 4 metų, jie realiai ir pakrypsta tą linkme, kur maždaug nusikaltėliais patampa. Interesting.
What was socializing them? And the answer to that, which I thought was so cool and so great, was play. Both pretend play and rough and tumble play.
Yeah,
and Hank Sepp has done lovely work on rats with rough and tumble play.
Yeah, that's a point that I make in my book, is that the play behavior of the boys and of young male primates.
Gal labiau sociopatais, jie nepasakė žodžio sociopatas. Jie geriau žino, jie tų studiją atliko, tai kam tu spėjai, gal labiau, ne gal labiau, jie pasakė, kuom tampa.
It's partly developing fighting skills. So it's partly just like in the females, their interest in infants is a preparation for adult life when they will have offspring. And for the males, the play fighting is in the preparation for adult life in which they will have a lot of competition going. But another aspect, very important, is that they learn how to control their strengths. They learn how to be nice to others. They learn to release pressure once the other cannot stand it. So if you look at an adult male gorilla, for example, with his big fist on a baby gorilla, he could just, with a little pressure, he could kill it because he's incredibly strong. But, adult male gorillas, they play with infants and they do very well with them. And that is because he has learned over a lifetime to control his physical strengths. He has,
right, and that rough and tumble play is so important for that because it's embodied, right? So one of the things because I really got interested in rough and tumble play as a primary source of socialization of aggression is that, and also more than that, right? Because it also underlies the spirit of reciprocity, I think, which is manifested in its purest sense in the spirit of play, because play is something that the participants have to engage in voluntarily.
And have to They have to enjoy it.
Right,
And
exactly.
so this also relates very much to the gender relationship, is that because we have a lot of trouble, of course, with men abusing women, men need to learn about their strengths, need to learn how to control it, need to learn when to hold back and when to use it. And play is an important factor in that. And so when I now hear,
Autistas, kad tokius žiūri, vaikai, užauk, tipo dieve mano. Po 5 metų ateisi, pats galbūt pažiūrėsi kažką įdomesnio, negu ten savo, nežinau, idiotus, kuriuos tu žiūri. Tipo, kam tokias nesąmonės rašyti?
I hear sometimes from people who have children that at schools there is less recess time and there is less opportunity for physical contact because the teachers say that you shouldn't be touching each other.
They forbid it. They forbid it entirely. At my school, my kids' school, the boys and the girls were forbidden to even pick up snow on the off chance that they would make a snowball. And so they just stopped the rough and tumble play of the males.
Šitie apribojimai tai visiškai nesąmonė, kur jau kiek mokslas gali papasakot, kiek netgi tokių tyrimų padaryti ir paskui sustabdo bet kokį, negali paimti sniego, kad neduok dieve padarys gniūžtį ir mesi kažką, absurdas. Ir apie tą ir kalba, kad per toli nuėjo su to auklėjimu, per toli nueina su to ribojimu visko, kas gali įžeis kažką, ar tenais, užgaut kažką fiziškai, galų galia pastumis ir panašiai, kad visko visiškai užblokuoti negali, nes tai trikdo, žmogaus vystymosi raidą galų galia. Ir apie tą žinom mes ir žmonija, apie tai žino jau daug metų, bet netrukdo vis tiek, nes tas prasidėjo jau labai senai nuo tada, kai tenais varžybose Amerikoje nustojo trackinti rezultatus, pavyzdžiui, varžybų. Arba dalinti ten trofėjus visiems, visi nugalėtojai. Ką tu mokini vaikus, kai taip darai? Kokių pamokų tada nemokini vaikų? Aš nežinau, ir nuo to jau senai prasidėjo tokie dalykai, kur paskui gal ir turi, kaip čia, pasiekmes su ta vyrų epidemija, kaip ten, kaip išreiškia? Crisis of masculinity, krizė vyriškumo tipo ir panašiai. Man atrodo, kad tokie draudimai labiau ateina dėl baimės patekti į teismą. Gal dalis ir dėl liability, bet didžioji dalis tai dėl tos naujo auklėjimo suvokimo, kad negalima, mano sesuo, pavyzdžiui, vaikas savo taip auklėjo, tipo, ta nauja mokykla, kur negalima balso pakelt nieko, ne dėl teismų, o tiesiog yra ta nauja, buvo bent jau ta nauja, dabar jau, nežinau ar nauja, bet dabar jos mažai likę iš tikrųjų. Gal, kad tipo negalima ten nieko vaikams, nei ten fizinės jėgos jokios naudoti, nei ten balsą pakelt. Ant popieriaus gal ir gerai skamba, bet netgi sesė labai greitai pamatė, link ko tai veda. Ir ant kiek vaikas būna visiškai out of control, nes netaip veikia jaunų vaikų ten tas ugdymas ir panašiai, kad turi būti nustatyti limitai ir viską, ir balsas pakeltas turi būti, ir autoritetas turi būti, ten daug tokių dalykų. Tai jo, liability gal kažkiek ir turi įtakos ten kažkur ten, bet pagrinde tai buvo prieš gal 10 metų prasidėjus ta nauja mokykla mamų, kur grinai auklėt, kad vaikus reikia, kad tipo be jokio, be nieko pralaimėtojų nėra ir viskas tas ir jas ten ir kaltino paskui, kad užaugino labai skystus, kaip sakant, vyrus kabutėse. Nes, aišku, ten tuo pačiu metu buvo dar diskusija apie smurto naudojimą, ten mušimo vaikų. Ir kad ten daug pasisakydavo, kad, mane mušė ir aš užaugau normalus ir panašiai. Į tą visą argumentą nelysim dabar, bet tuo metu vyko tos visos diskusijos labai. Tai, Ok. Pagalbinių ratukų nuo dviračio taip ir nenuėmė, o kaip išmoks atsakomybės? Nežinau, apie ką tu čia. Aš turėjau menį dėl to, kad mokyklai neleidžia sniego gniūžčiam žaisti. Aš suprantu, aš sakau, kad tikrai yra dalis ir dėl liability iš teisinės pusės, bet tai nėra, aš nežinau, ar tu buvai tos diskusijos, kaip čia, ar tu domėjais to, kai tas atsirado ta diskusija, kai pradėjo visus draudimus daryti ir kai pradėjo tų rezultatų nebeskaičiuoti. Pagrindinis argumentas nebuvo, kad čia tipo mus į teismą paduos. Nes ten, man atrodo, apsidraudė yra ir tos mokyklos ir panašiai, kad čia nebūtų liable netgi už tai. nes tai jie negali tokių dalykų kontroliuoti, kad laukia kažkas tenais, tipo, ne jų teritorijoje ir whatever, galbūt ir ten, nes visam pasauliu čia būtų tada. Per laisvų vaikams mane varžyti. Aš turiu omeny, kad tavo hipotezė, kad, kad tai yra dėl teisminių priežasčių, kad, gal dalis ir yra dėl to, bet pagrinde, kai visi tie apribojimai ir panašiai atsirado, tai nebuvo argumentas, kurį darė. Tai buvo daroma dėl tipo psichologinių dalykų, kad čia nereikia vaikų traumuoti, nes jie pralaimėjo krepšinio varžybos, tai davai duodam visiems medalį. Čia tipo iš tos pusės, kad tu pakelsi balsą prieš vaiką ir jisai užaugs ten sutraumuotas ir panašiai ir panašiai. Šitie buvo argumentai, o ne tie, kad į teismą mus gali paduoti, nes sniego gniūžtė metą. Tai tipo, tai buvo kitos priežastys. Aš apie tai tik tam.
100%. And Panksepp showed if you deprive male rats of play, juveniles, they would play hyperactively when you gave them the chance, and that you could use methylphenidate to suppress that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the rough and tumble play is absolutely essential. It's not just for developing fighting skills, which is part of it, but it's also how males control themselves, because they become physically stronger than females, they need to have full control over their body.
Right, and I think they also learn, through rough and tumble play, kids also learn what hurts and what hurts them, really, and so, because when you I rough and tumble played with my kids a lot. I set up kind of a little wrestling ring made out of 2 couches pushed together. And and they love it, right? They're so excited by it. But you tend to push the kids to their physical limits, right? Because you twist their arms and you sort of toss them in the air and you're engaged in this dance that's an exploration of physical limitation. And so I think one of the things that play does, and Panksepp showed, there was a student of his, Tiffany Fields, who massaged premature infants in the incubator. It showed that she could radically facilitate their development. I think play also regulates emotion because it's soothing and it shows you, it allows you to make a clear distinction between real threats and false threats, and between physical situations that actually hurt and those that don't. And that has to be done in an embodied sense.
Bet čia irgi labiau buvo interviu, bet čia labiau iš psichologinės gal labiau pusės, kur niekas nesiginčia su Petersonu. Ginčias, bet tipo labai mažai kas ginčias, nes jis tose temose tikrai nusimano ir išmano galų gale. Ir greičiausiai dabar mes eisime tos tai yra senesnius video. Ir 18-17 galbūt metų, ir tada pažiūrėsim, bet blemba, man įdomu iš tikro būtų pačio Petersono dabartinės, nes šiais interviu labiau interviu ima iš žmonių, o ne, savo pozicijas gal pasakoja, būtų gal įdomu, nes tam video apie Ukrainą, tai ten jis tikrai gan griežtai pasisakė tam tikrom vietom. Ir ten labiau jau pasirodė jau neapykanta leftistams ir panašiai, tai turbūt sunku bus įvertinti, kiek jis dabar toli nuėjęs, o gal ir visai toli nenuėjo, tai yra pakrypo gal labiau tvirčiau, bet jo čia pagrindėjo ten visi video. Why Twitter is insane, mes tą kaip ir matėm anksčiau, bet jis netiek daug tų, I guess, video. Ne, Twitter ban mes matėm, Twitter is insane, tiktais ne, bet jo, man atrodo dabar galima tiesiog pažiūrėti šiek tiek senesnius jo kelis video ir aš nežinau, gal galim pažiūrėti pavyzdžiui video, aš čia įsijungiau random video, vienos iš jų paskaitų. Aha, bet matai jo, aš dabar jau dar vieno ilgo podcasto, ar panašiai nežiūrėjus, nes vakar žiūrėjau tą valandos video, tai užteks, I guess, nes aš nenoriu savaitę, žiūrėti video, kad tai, I guess, užteks, bet aš norėjau pažiūrėti dabar tą senojo video iš jo paskaitų. Čia, man atrodo, filmuotas pats video iš paskaitos dar anksčiau, minimum 2018 tipo. Ir gauti maždaug feelą, kaip jisai keitėsi per tos paskutinius 5, 6, whatever metus.
Okay,
Pažiūrim čia video. Čia tiesiog, kiek žinau, nesusijęs su politika, tiesiog, I guess, paskaita apie IQ. O Jezu, kodėl aš čiaudiu šiandien, atsiprašau, tai pažiūrėjom tiesiog paprastą 12 minučių video iš jo paskaitos, aigės, kuris vedė pasas, nes, dabar jis paintinamas yra kaip blogiausias žmogus planetoje, bet reikia nepamiršti, kad tai vis dėlto yra profesorius ir paskaitas vedė ir tipo, anyway.
IQ items.
IQ
So
testas, ne?
this is from a test, roughly, it isn't from the direct test, but it's an analog of the Raven.
Trikampis. Šitas. Jo, 5 atsakymas, aha, aš. Nu. Ja, bet čia labai lengva, čia negali būti taip lengva, ne? Trikampis žvaigždė, tipo visos 3 figūros ir tada 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 ir vienas trūksta trikampio su 2. Maybe.
Raven's progressive matrices. Now, here's how the Ravens was derived. So imagine that you got your 100 questions, and you can take out the sum of those and call that IQ. Okay, so now you have a score. Then you can do a correlation between all of the items and that score, and you can find out which single item is the best predictor of the total score. Because you might see that question 39 has no correlation with the mean, with the average. You say, well, that isn't a very good question. You'd actually throw that out of the next test. But you'd say, well, item number 15 is correlated at 0.75 with the total score. So that's a good single item. So then imagine that you went across sets of IQ tests and you took out the best single item predictors of full-scale IQ. What you'd end up with is something like this.
Okay.
So the Raven's progressive matrices is a very good test of fluid intelligence. And it's
Raveno progresyvi matrica nustato, gera nustatyti fluid intelligence. Kas yra fluid intelligence?
Relatively non-linguistic, which is also an advantage.
Prisitaikymas,
right? Imagine you want
tas intelektas, kur tipo leidžia neturimas žinias naudoti, o prisitaikyti prie naujos situacijos arba naują problemą spręsti, fluid intelligence.
To assess the intelligence of a very diverse range of people, and they all came from different linguistic backgrounds. Well, as long as they can understand the instructions, which are almost self-evident, then they're going to be able to do this. Okay, so this is, you see, you have to guess, in case you didn't already figure this out, which you...
Fluid intelligence refers to the ability to reason and think flexibly. Crystallized intelligence refers to the accumulation of knowledge, facts, and skills that are acquired through life. Tai aš labai arti bent jau suvokimu. Crystallized intelligence vadinasi tas tipo, ką tu paskaitai ir žinai tipo, o tas fluid, tai vat išspręsti problemą ir reason. Okay. Jo, aš taip maždaug
using your intelligence and applying it, you're trying to replace the question mark with one of these. And so here's how you do it, roughly speaking. It's probably a working memory test because you have to hold a variety of variables in imagination at the same time. Okay, so the first thing you see is every row has a star, a triangle, and a square. And each row has a dot, 2 dots, and 3 dots. And so every row has to have a triangle, square, and star, and 1, 2, or 3 dots. Okay, so this one, first of all, what's it missing in terms of shape? Triangle. Excellent. See, that's why you're at the U of T. And then what's it missing for dots? 2 dots. Excellent. So we do a little scan here and we see, oh, look, well, it could be that one, or it could be, that's it. It's that one. And so, is that right? Yes. Aren't we smart? No. That was easy. So no, you're not very smart if you figure that one out, because pretty much everybody can figure that one out. I think this next one is more difficult.
Oh. Progresija. Tempė. Ištempė. Tipo, ištempimas keliom fazėm ir tada trečias. Bet tas irgi lengvas, jo. Tiesiog paimti tarsi 2 figūras ir ištemti. prasilenkia čia viena su kita forma. Nu, tipo, jeigu tu paimsi jas ir temsi, tipo, nu, įsivaizduoju, kad tai yra dvi atskiros figūros, kaip aš įsivaizdavau, tipo, paimsi, vat, už kampučių ir temsi. Pirma, jos susijungia ir tada beveik išsiskiria, bet susijungia ties, tais galiukais, tipo. Ne, trečias. Nu, mėlyna tu temsi, mėlynas turi būti po dešinę. Nes tu paimi juos ir tempi, ir tas, kuris yra, pradžioje kairėje, jis atsiduršta dešinėje, tai kadangi mėlynas buvo atsidūręs šičia, tai tu jį temsi trečias. Aš tu mėlyną patemsi biškiukai dešinę pusę, ir tada jis bus dešinėje, ir tada iki galo dešinėje bus.
Okay, so in the first row you see that there's two objects, each are different color, and they move together, right? They join. That one, they're separate there, they join, they're together. They're separate there, and they join there. So this one should be halfway in between those two. And the other thing that happens is, let's see, this item actually might be incorrectly represented because the blue should be on the other side. Whatever. What's that? 3. Yes.
Kalba, jo, teisingai. Jo, viskas
They
ilgai.
flip? Okay, well, anyways, you see that it's 3. See, I'm not very bright because I've just lectured for an hour. Okay, so that was a more difficult item. And then...
Oh, what the fuck is this? Trikampis. Nu, trikampiai, tada juodas, geltonas, mėlynas. Juodas, geltonas, mėlynas, tai reikia juodo trikampio, trūksta juodas trikampis, tai arba šitas. Ir dar po brūkšnį, Šičia yra brūkšnys juodas horizontaliai, geltonas šitaip. Šičia yra mėlynas horizontaliai, juodas šitaip. Tai čia turi būti geltonas horizontaliai, mėlynas šitaip. Trečias vėl? Horizontalus brūkšnys, juodas trikampis, geltonas, antro trikampio. Tada horizontalus mėlynas, pirmo trikampio ir vertikalus juodo trikampio. Tai turėtų tada geltonas būti horizontalus pirmo trikampio, mėlynas brūkšnys, antro trikampio. Ir aš spėju trečias tada. Would make sense. I don't
This one
fucking
is more difficult. If I remember.
Blet, aš norėjau video pažiūrėti, bet įdomu, ne? Įdomu. Gal ir 5, bet palauk, kaip 5 would make sense. Geltonas brūkšnys tiktų pagal mano, o tada kaip paaiškinti juodas brūkšnys, nes šitas mėlynas. O čia sutampa su trikampiu šitie du. Nemokėčiau paaiškinti. Ne, trečias? Aš manau, kad trečias, jo. Nu, čia tarsi nesunku, čia turėtų būti nesunku, ne? Bet...
Remember correctly.
Žiūrim
So,
Arba vapšė dabar, imagine, pasakys visiškai suklydom. Netikiu,
so
bet...
they're all 3 different colors. So it has to be
8,
color.
kas what the fuck?
Then, what's the other thing? The relationship between the colors change. So, what's the answer?
3, final answer.
You're all scared to answer, aren't you? Because you might be wrong. Yeah. And the more anxious people are even less likely to answer. Number 3.
Gerai, good.
Okay, so if you want to
Okay, we're not brain dead, okay?
test someone's IQ, then you put together a nice batch
Bet čia
of
buvo
these at
lengvi
different
turbūt labai.
levels of difficulty, and then you sum them, and then you rank order, and then you correct for age, and then you have IQ, and that's that. And then you can say, well, then you can sort people into the complexity of their occupations, and isn't that dismal?
Aš praleidau,
Then you
užsikalbėjau.
sum them, and then each of these at different levels of difficulty, and then you sum them, and then you rank order, and then you correct for age, and then you have IQ, and that's that. And then you can say, well, then you can sort people into the complexity of their occupations, and isn't that dismal and wretched?
Okay.
But it's true. So here you go. This is from the Wunderlich people. They're a commercial company that makes general cognitive ability tests, and it's often used by corporations, even though it's actually illegal. It's actually illegal to use IQ tests, but the Wunderlich doesn't promote themselves as testing IQ. I think it's general cognitive ability, which is the same thing, but whatever. The SATs, the GREs, the LSATs, all
Okay.
of those are IQ tests. So now they're more crystallized than fluid. We'll get to that in a minute. But crystallized knowledge is what you accrue across time. So you could say that fluid intelligence is what programs your brain. It fills it with facts, let's say. It fills it with knowledge. And then, but you can get an estimate of your intelligence by sampling your domain of factual knowledge. And the reason for that is that, well, obviously, the better the programmer, the better the content. And so what that also means is that you could, if your prefrontal cortex was damaged later in life, your fluid IQ could plummet, but your crystallized IQ remain more or less intact. So even though they're not different, one produces the other, and then once the producer has produced, then the producer can disappear, and you still got the encoded knowledge. So at least that's how it looks to me. So, okay, so how smart do you have to be different things in life? Well,
Okay.
if you have an IQ of 116 to 130, which is 85th percentile and above, so it's one person in 8 up to one person in 130, I believe is 85, 90, 95, is it 95? I think it's 95. One person in 8 to one person in 20. Then you can be a attorney, a research analyst, an editor, an advertising manager, a chemist, an engineer, an executive manager, etc. That's
Attorney, research analyst, editor, advertising chemist, manager, trainee, sistemas, auditor. Tipo, aukšto IQ reikia, kad auditorius, pavyzdžiui, būtum, arba advertising manager. Ką tie darbai reiškia, nes atrodytų, kad ten engineer ar chemist gal sure, bet aukšto IQ reikia. Trainee, ką reiškia trainee? Manager? Atrodytų, kai tokie darbai, kur nėra labai sudėtingi tavo protinių galių, bet taigi sprendimus priminėti reikia. Ok. Reikia to liquid IQ, kad priimti sprendimus įvairiom besikeičiančiom situacijom tokiuose gal darbuose. Bet attorney, tada, čia kaip tik sakyčiau, crystallize to IQ daug daugiau reikia, nes jiem reikia actually žinoti, bet ne, tu turi žinoti tos visus įstatymus, bet tada ir pritaikyti juos labai specifiniai situacijai, kad laimėti, tipo, bylą, kaip čia, išspręs problemą, kurie, supratau, kurie tinka galbūt šitam apmokytas. Aš žinau, ką žodis reiškia, bet man labiau įdomu, kokį tai darbą atlieka, kaip profesija trainee, kas tas yra. An advertising manager develops, implements, and manages a company's advertising strategy both from a business, sales, and technical perspective. I guess jo, reikia ir šitam prisitaikymo tokio prie aplinkos, kuri ten pastoviai besikeis, kur makes sense. Tai čia, kuo daugiau reikia adaptacijos tokios, gal on the spot ar panašiai prie skirtingų situacijų turbūt, tuo labiau tau to IQ reikės fluid intelligence kažkiek gal. Tai tą pasakius, kokie darbai bus su ten nulinio IQ žmonėms. Tai fabrike, I guess, kur tau pasakė, trikampį dedi čia ir tu tiesiog dedi. Tada nereikia jokio to sprendimo darimo. Kokie dar darbai? Tai yra 8,695% procentilė. Tai jau gan daug. 1 iš 20 ir 1 iš 8, kaip čia pasakė. Tai jau gan daug. Ten, aišku, jis gali eiti toliau, bet tai bus 1 iš 1000, ten 100 000 žmonių. Tai mums relevantas yra jau. Apie 100 vidurkis, jep. Aišku, dar nereikia pamiršti, kad IQ testus gali išmokti daryti. Tai kiek jie ten tikslus ir panašiai, aišku, jeigu tu visiškai būsi turbūt to fluid IQ neturėsi, tau nepadės niekas, bet tu jas gali išmokti daryti. Tai tipo, kuo daugiau tu jų darysi ir praktikuosies, tai tavo IQ vis didės, nes tai yra irgi kaip ir įgūdis jos išmokti daryti. Tai nėra toks be all, do all, tipo, kaip čia, end of all tipo things. Jo, tu būsi geresnis testuose ir gausi geresnį rezultatą, tai yra tavo IQ padidės, nes testo rezultatas nusprendžia tavo IQ, būtent, that's the point. Tai ir yra, todėl aš tą ir sakau, kad tavo IQ gali tapti geresnis, nes tu gali išmokti daryti tos testus ir tai yra gan gerai documented. Praktika turi, ten aš žiūrėjom, mes atrodo šičia, arba aš atskirai žiūrėjau, kur kalbėjo tie žmonės, kur ten azietis toks vienas pasakojo apie tos IQ testus ir ten panašiai, kad nežinau, kad aš nemačiau, kur John Peterson kalbėjo apie tą, bet tai yra gan žinomas dalykas, aš nežinau, kad tipo, nu, matai, ką tu sakai. Ką tu sakai, kad Jordanas Peterson sakė, kad tavo IQ nepagerėjo, nors testas taip ir pasakė, bet that's the point. Todėl darbo vietos ir nelegalu naudot IQ testus ten ir panašiai, ir turbūt yra limitacijos, nes, nu, tai nėra pati geriausia sistema. Tai yra toks maždaug, galbūt parodys, jeigu pas tai nebus visiškai, tai gal tu nebusi tinkamas į tokią poziciją, nu, tipo, kur reikės to fluid IQ, bet esmė tokia, kad sakyti, vat gerai, reikia 115 IQ arba nepriimsim, čia yra nesąmonė. Nes tu gali išmokti IQ testą daryti, techniškai tu protingesnis netapai, bet kadangi tavo IQ vertina tas testas, tai tavo IQ padidėjo, nors tu pats protingesnis netapai, tu tik išmokai patirties įvai testą darant. Tai aš suprantu, kaip galima, pavyzdžiui, Jordan Peterson, aš nežinau, kokiam kontekstai sakė, gali sakyti, kad, okei, tavo IQ actually faktiškas nepakils, bet techniškai pakilo, nes tu testą geriau atlikai, nes turėjai daug praktikos. Supranti, ką noriu pasakyti? Anyway. Ko aš tavo IQ neįsivaizduoju. Aš nežinau net kokius mes darėm mokyklai. Mokyklai, kai darėm ten, nežinau, 7 ar whatever klasė, tai mano buvo vos virš vidurkio, aš tą prisimenu. Bet have no fucking idea. Ir aš net nežinau, ten vaikišką kažkokį darėm net gal nerimtą. Aš neįsivaizduoju. Ką manai apie IQ testus? Aš turbūt nesu atlikinėjęs ir net matęs rimto emocinio intelekto testos, tipo negalėčiau net įvertinti. Bet turbūt irgi, nu, panašų dalyką pasako, turbūt kaip tu gali, nu, turbūt kažkiek įvertina, vis tiek tavo suvokimą bent jau į tą pusę, nors.
That's not the high end for IQ, by the way.
Bet jo, nepamirškim, kad čia ir IQ testai, ir emocinio intelekto testai, tuos, kur internete galima pasidaryti, tenais tos kaip žaidimus tokius, nu tai nieko verti. Čia, aišku, aš kalbu ir kalbam apie normalius, tipo rimtus.
It can go up indefinitely, although there's fewer and fewer people as it goes up. So, if you want to be the best at what you're doing, bar none, then having an IQ of above 145 is a necessity, and maybe you're pushing 160 in some situations, and maybe that's
Aš buvau tarp geriausių LoL žaidėjų pasaulyje. Tarp geriausių LoL žaidėjų pasaulyje. Ar tai reiškia, kad mano IQ virš 105 buvo? Bitch.
Making you one person in 10,000 or even one person in 100,000.
LoL žaisti reikia fluid IQ, tikrai reikia fluid IQ. Nes tai, nu, labai besikeičiančioje aplinkoje prisitaikymas ir sprendimų priėmimas. Tai, sakyčiau, tiesiog bent 250 mano IQ buvo LoL'e, tipo, žinoma, tai žinoma. Smart boy, big IQ, such big IQ. Taip ir galvokim. Va, taip ir priimkim šitą informaciją. Niekad nesidarykim dabar tikro IQ testo ir tiesiog gyvenkim su tą mintim. Shut the fuck ups ir vankuki gerai. Vat pas mane turėjo būti masyvus IQ. Aš esu žinomas, kad turiu labai didelį IQ ir labai didelį ego. Tai tom ir paliekam tom gerai. Su šitą mintim.
Reasonably stress tolerant and also somewhat conscientious. So, you know, people, and you think, well, why is it that smart people are at the top of dominance hierarchies? And the answer to that, in part, is because they get there first. Right? I mean, everything's a race, roughly speaking, and the faster you are, the more likely you are to be at the forefront of the pack, and intelligence in large part is speed. That's not all of it is. So if you're moving towards something difficult rapidly, the faster people are going to get there first. So IQ of 110 to 115, so that's 85th to 73rd to 85th percentile. Copywriter, accountant.
Jo čia tada žemesnė procentilė jau virš vidurkio, bet net tiek daug jais. Still. Skaityk jo, jeigu čia 95%, tai pavyzdžiui, lolė, kai aš challenge'as buvau ten 20 whatever kažkelintas Europai, tai čia yra 0,001 procentilė, ten iš viso, ten mažiau negu 0,20% lygtais, taip ten veikia. Tai genijus lolė.
Manager, sales manager.
Autistas visur kitur, bet apie tai nekalbam, ble.
Sales analyst, general manager, purchase.
Galimas ir man kokį gerai, nustok čia gadint mano IQ gerai.
Agent, registered nurse, sales account executive. If you look at universities, the smartest people are, they're above this. Who are the smartest people?
Tai čia copyright accountant, manager, sales, programeris. Programavimą studijavau, taigi irgi programuot moku. Jo, aš genijus tiesiog, aš belenkoks IQ pas mane. Belenkoks IQ.
People at university. What do you think? Mathematicians, physicists and mathematicians, right.
Pala, ką čia klausia?
People are sales account executive. If you look at universities, the smartest people are they're above this.
Universitas smartest matematikai, okay. Makes sense. Lordexa kūrim.
Mathematicians, physicists and mathematicians, right. I could tell you who's on the other end, but I won't. Yeah, I'd like to though. Anyways, okay. Yeah, I'd like to though.
Oh god, delivery.
Anyways, okay.
Iš tikrųjų labai entertaining jo paskaita. Aš nepraleisčiau ne vienos jo paskaitos, jeigu tokį profesorių turėčiau. Tu juokauji? Kaip engaging yra netgi video žiūrėti, tipo, amazing, ble, ne? Ar aš čia vienas toks? You are definitely a genius. We're all and you're playing League now. You started playing League. It's a genius thing. Just, I'm telling you. You're not that good yet, but just, yeah, your IQ will grow in time if you keep playing, you know? Just fucking genius. 115 nėra genijus. Gali užsičiaps ir man kokį, blėt.
Okay, going down now 103 to 108 is slightly above average, right? 60th.
Tai čia 70% vos virš vidurkio.
The 70th percentile. Store manager, bookkeeper, credit clerk, lab tester, general sales, telephone sales, accounting clerk, computer operator, customer service rep, technician, clerk, typist. So you see at this level, people have some technical skill and some ability to deal with complex things. Okay, that's dead average. 100 is average.
O tipo visiškai vidurkis? Dispatcher, general office, police patrol officer, receptionist, cashier. Okay, aš net nepagalvoju apie daug tų profesijų, bet realiai, jo, pavyzdžiui, ten pardavėjas, tipo, tau reikia sugebėti suskaičiuoti, I guess kažką, bet ne, tau parodo viską. Bet tipo tokia funkcija atlieki, gal ne visai brain dead, bet tada žiūrėkit, nėra tokių kaip ten, kaip tie assembly line workeriai. To dar nėra, tai legit bus žemiausio, tipo, nulinio IQ ten paskutiniai. Nes, tipo, pagalvoti, jeigu logiškai, tai tam nereikia jokio tipo prisitaikymo. Tiesiog darai monotonišką darbą tą patį. OnlyFans beje irgi nebuvo. Gal dar bus, pala.
Dispatcher in a general office, police patrol officer, receptionist, cashier, general clerical, inside sales clerk, meter reader, printer, teller, data entry, electrical helper. 95th to 98. Machinist, food department manager, quality control checker, security guard, unskilled labor, maintenance, arc welder, die setter, mechanic. Good IQ range.
Factory production, assembler, tai čia IQ nuo 87 iki 93, bet čia dar ne žemiausias. Tai kas tada žemiausiams? Jeigu net Nes čia ir janitor, ir custodian, tie valytojai visokie ir panašiai. Warehouseman, messenger, packer. Kokie darbai yra žemiau? Ja, OnlyFans net nebuvo, nes ten tipo per mažas procentas, žinai, daro. Full genius, tiesiog, sakau. Tai taip ir palikim. Tai niekad nesidarykim IQ testų ir su ta mintim tiesiog ir gyvenkim, kad mes genijai tiesiog esam. Nors dabar vasarą Warehouseman dirba IQ below average, let's go. Bet gerai, man įdomu, kokie yra darbai tada, kurie dar mažiau reikalautų to liquid intelligence, fluid intelligence. Ar mes sugalvojam? Ar jūs sugalvojat nors vieną? Gerai, ne apie tai čia. Crackhead, čia ne profesija.
87 to 93. Messenger, factory production worker.
Sargas? Sargas buvo, security guard, va. Tai net ne žemiausias čia, nes čia biški mažiau virš vidurkio, bet tipo security guard net. O loreris tai profesija. Nu, man tai taip, aš iš to taigi duoną valgiau. 5 minutes craft video manager lowest IQ. Twitch fucking streamer lowest IQ.
Assembler, food service worker, nurse's aide, warehouseman, custodian, janitor, material handler, packer.
Andrew Tate fanai lowest IQ čia bus, atsakau. Reaction video maker. Iš tikrųjų gali būti, blet, teisybė kažkokia. Jokio efforto nereikia. Žiūri ir reaktini. Literally 0 IQ kontentas, blet. Tikiuosi nebus taip, nes biškai būtų, blet. Aš dabar bijau sekančios skaidrės, na.
Now, what you're starting to see is that as you move down the hierarchy,
Hot up streamer,
the jobs
kappa.
get simpler. They're more likely to be assigned by other people, or they're repetitive. Because what IQ predicts to some degree is how rapidly you can learn something, but once you've learned it, it doesn't predict necessarily how well you do at it. And so the more repetitive jobs people with lower IQs are more suited to more repetitive jobs. Under 87, is there something? Well, no. Right.
Oh. Čia ta mintis ir yra, kad toks pointas buvo, kad realiai IQ tai IQ, bet ką darys su, kiek ten, 20... Su 10-13, kiek čia procentų, nu arba bottom ten 20%. Ką darys su tai žmonėm, kai jie neturi jokio darbo tipo, kurį jie galėtų atlikti?
Starting to see how well you do at it. Repetitive jobs. Under 87, is there something? Well, no.
Mukbang? Mukbangui nereikia maistą išsirinkti. Vat gangbangui tau nereikia realiai nieko rinktis turbūt. Į rezervatus arba getus juos. Bet jo, Amorant tikrai yra protinga in business, ką padarė, tai Mukbang versus Gangbang compilation. Gangbangui maisto rinktis nereikia, true.
Right. That's a big problem.
Bet pala, man čia įdomu.
Has not addressed at all.
Okay, Star sako,
kad
mūsų
people with IQs of less than 85 are very, very rare. So what the hell are those people supposed to do?
That's my question.
It's 15% of the population.
That's my question.
What are they supposed to do?
Drink?
Well, we better figure it out. Because one of the things that's happening too is that as the
high IQ geeks
get a hold of the world, the demand for cognitive power is increasing, not decreasing, right? You want to be a teller? Well, you know, those checkout machines, they're not so simple. You want to work at McDonald's? You think that's a simple job? You don't see robots working at McDonald's. And the reason for that is that what McDonald's workers do is too complex for robots to do. So
far.
Well, so this is a discussion that no one wants to have, but that's okay. It's still a problem, and it has to be dealt with. So the U.S. government, I think I told you this at one point already, it's illegal to induct anyone into the U.S. Army if they have an IQ of less than 83, right?
Oh, is that true? Į armiją neima žmogaus, kuris IQ turi mažiau... jis turi ginklą laikyti rankose. Ar ten granatai savo būrį mes... Make sense, gal?
It's about 10% of the population.
Okay.
Because the U.S. Army, and they've been doing IQ testing since IQ testing began, because they want everybody they can possibly get into the Army. Because in peacetime, they use it as a way of moving people up the socioeconomic ladder. And in
Viskas žinos, ką daryti, kad šaukimo nepraeis.
well, obviously, you need as many soldiers as you can get your hands on. And so you're not going to be any pickier than you have to be. So when the U.S. Army says it's illegal to induct anybody into the armed forces if they have an IQ of less than 83, then you know that they've done it for absolute necessity, right? And when people have made a finding that contradicts what they want to hear and they're doing it out of absolute necessity, you can be reasonably true that it's one of those facts that just won't bloody well go away. And so you might think, well, if there's nothing for someone with an IQ of less than 83 to do in the army, what makes you think that there's something that they can do in the general population? And then the issue is, you know, because the conservatives will say, well, they should just work harder. It's like, sorry, that ain't going to fly. And the liberals will say, well, there's no difference between people anyhow. And you can just train people to do everything. And that's wrong. So they're both wrong. And they're seriously wrong. And the fact that neither side of the political perspective will take a good, cold, hard look at this problem means that we're going to increasingly have a structural problem in our societies, because we're complexifying everything so rapidly that you can't find employment unless you're intelligent. You guys are really going to face this, you know. Lawyers are disappearing like mad. And the reason for that is, you can look it up online.
Iš tikrųjų, žiūrint į kai kuriuos Amber Heard lawyerius, tai he has a point, kap.
Increasingly, you can do things yourself if you're smart. And so, like, the working class people have been wiped out pretty nicely over the last 30 years by automation and various other things. It's the low end of the white-collar class that's coming up next. So I'm not saying that lawyers are in the low end, but low-end lawyers are in the low end of the white-collar class. So there's still going to be plenty of positions for people who are creative and fast on their feet and super smart. In fact, those people are going to have all the money, and that's already happening to a great degree. You know, because if you're smart and you can use
Lamorkus pats save užtagino ir kiek parašė. The fuck?
a computer, you're so smart, it's just absolutely unbelievable, right? And if you can't use a computer, and lots of people, and I don't mean, you know, you can open Word, that isn't what I mean. I mean...
Okay, ta prasme, amazing lecture, ne, labai įdomu buvo, bet čia, kai dar dirbo profesorium, I guess, ir paskaitas darė, okay. Tada pažiūrim 10 minučių video, I'm actually an expert John Peterson embarrassed, čia tokį reikia žiūrėti. Nu, tipo, reikia, tame esmė, nes aš noriu pajausti, kaip jisai dialogus vedė ir koks jisai buvo ir kaip jis bendravo prieš 5 metus, tarkim. Ok, jo, čia 18 metų. Ok, tai kai jisai kalba apie free speech'ą, pavyzdžiui, jis labai griežtai ir aistringai čia ir pasisakė ir seniau. Beje, nu, aš prieš kancelinimą aišku esu, bet, nu, čia toks klausimas, kokį tu atsakymą tikėjasi. Ok, čia įdomu, nes čia buvo jo pozicija ir jis labai gan agresyviai, aistringai, bet, nu, I guess dėl to ir prasidėjo, dėl to pataisos to įstatymo C16, kas ir buvo apie tą, vat, compelled speech. Tai realiai jis čia jo aistringiausia tema, dėl ko jis stipriausiai jaučiasi. Tai make sense turbūt, kai jis tą labiausiai gins. Jo, šitas ilgas ir mes tą esam matę, kaip bebūtų. Galim pažiūrėti best moments, nes tikslas tų video neprisiminti iš naujo, ką jisai sakė ir panašiai, bet aš noriu labiau, kai mes pamatėm naujausius video ir, pažiūrėjau, apie Ukrainą, kaip šnekėjo ir panašiai, jo posture ir laikysena ir intonacija ir panašiai, ir maždaug palyginti, ar pasikeitė per 5 metus ar panašiai.
I want to go talk to Peterson. Peterson, do you have any comments on the
Šitas klipas, by the way, buvo, nu čia turbūt visi bus ikoniškiausi klipai iš to laiko, kai jisai actually išgarsėjo dėl to viso pasisakymo.
I want to go talk to Peterson. Peterson, do you have
Beje, šičia pana visiškai išprotėjus.
any comments on the Nazi presence at your protest? The presence of Nazis and white supremacists assaulting people at your protest. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I don't like Nazis.
Then why were they here?
Well, how can I answer
Are there views in alignment with yours? At some point you have to realize.
That's a foolish question. Look, if you want to know what my views are,
I've watched all of your videos, yes.
Including
Yes, I have.
then why would you ask such a question?
Because this is my interpretation of your videos.
apparently
That's
I wanted
All of
Oh god, the fucking stupidity. Netgi iš visų jokelių ir panašiai liejasi tiesiog retardinės tos panos, asiuminu, Jesus Christ. I watched all... Oh my god. Okay, Aš turiu daug mažesnę kantrybę idiotams negu Petersonas. Šis labai gerai laikosi, tipo, Jesus.
Of the people who arranged the protest against you watched all of your videos.
It's like, do you want to disavow?
150 videos on YouTube.
No, your lectures, which sparked the debate.
Do you want to disavow the support?
Could you let me talk to her for a moment?
Don't call me that, please.
Don't call me that, please, President.
I have 150 lectures on YouTube. There's 500 hours of my views.
Do you really
If
think that
wanna
you're
find
worth
out
all
what
of
they
that
were-
time?
So look, I will answer your question, okay? I've studied Nazism for a very long time. It's been 4 decades, and I understand it very well. And I can tell you that there's some awful people lurking in the corners, and they're ready to come out. And if the radical left keeps pushing the way
That
it's
sounds
pushing,
very much like a
they're
threat.
going to come.
That sounds very much
That's
like a
not
threat.
a threat.
That sounds very much like a threat. Would you like to disavow the physical violence? Trans people were physically assaulted at this rally in your name. Would you like to disavow that violence?
Yes.
Oh god.
So you wish that didn't happen, and you want to. And I'm going to post this online that you would like people to not to be more accommodating of trans people and people of color at your events in future.
I would
I'm
like
a
there
person
to
of
be
color.
no
Listen,
violence.
I'm a person of color, and I felt very accommodating here. I felt like my voice. Thank you very much.
I'm also a former Muslim, and I feel like this guy is
I'm a
the
person
best.
of color.
I
There are
love
many
his
Muslim
videos.
You wanted to
people.
disavow. You wanted to disavow, and this is the disavowal. I am not an advocate of violence. I'm speaking out the way I'm speaking out because I think this is a route to no violence. And violence is lurking. And you can say that sounds like a threat.
There was
It's
no
not a
violence at
threat.
our protest, though. There was violence at your protest. So what does that say about our
It's
views?
not my protest.
violence.
You know, asking me continually freighted questions isn't very helpful if you actually want to have a dialogue. You have no idea if I'm your enemy. You have no idea about me.
You won't.
Yeah. Jo, čia yra didžiausia problema su ta retorika. Dieve, kiek jis kantrybės turi. Aš tą žmogų... Prieš 5 metus aš tą žmogų būčiau pasiuntęs nahui, net nešnekėsiu. Dabar aš turbūt šnekėčiau, nes free contentas. bet, tipo, tas žmogus atėjo, jau apsisprendęs, jis yra visiškai bukaprotis. Tas matosi iš klausimų, kuriuos užduoda ir kaip priema atsakymus, kaip tai yra nepriema atsakymų. Ir tuos klausimus, kur uždavinė, jam nerūpi atsakymai. Jam nerūpi atsakymai. Jokių. Į visus tos klausimus, kuriuos užduoda tas, kas už kameros čia, nežinau, tas. Jam nerūpi jokie atsakymai. Tas mane beren kaip trigerina. Ir aš esu tikrai kalbėjęs tokiais žmonėmis su ta viena Tinderio pana, kur prisimenu, kur pasakojau, kur paskui, kad Petersono knygą skaičiau ir tiesiog went ballistic, tiesiog atrodo, tą pačią akimirką išsijungia visas racionalus protas ir gebėjimas komunikuoti su žmogum. Ir lieka tik emocija, kad aš nekenčiu Petersono, tai bet kas mane nepalaiko Petersono nuomonę, bet mane kritikuoja dėl mano aklos nepykantos ant Petersono, reiškia palaiko Petersoną, reiškia yra mano priešas ir aš patapau jai instantį priešų.
I won't use my pronouns, so I'm pretty sure you're my enemy. Yes.
Yeah, well, I know you think that, but I don't believe that using your pronouns is going to do you any good in the long run.
But would you use alternate pronouns if a student asked you to?
I think I've made my position on that clear already.
Well, perhaps not to our audience at home who are just being introduced to this. Would you use alternate pronouns? And why not?
Because I don't believe that other people have the right to determine what language I use, especially when it's backed by punitive legislation. And when the words that are being required are the constructions, they're artificial constructions of people I regard as radical ideologues whose viewpoint I do not share.
And Bill C-16 is actually not about cisgender people. It's about protections for transgender people. And that's not, it's not about Jordan Peterson. So, we
Toks dumb statementas, blėt, iš karto.
should have people learning to listen more. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a very good reason. When things get political, I like to ask who benefits and who gets to decide the rules of the game. So, mostly with this Peterson controversy, which is really just a small drama, a tempest in a teapot, he could just get over learning to program a few pronouns into his phone. By the way, I only have half a dozen or so that I actually use on an everyday basis, so it's not all that difficult.
Professor Peterson, sorry, Professor Peterson, good jumping because I think Professor Peterson wants to get in on that.
Yeah, well, kindness is the excuse that social justice warriors use when they want to exercise control over what other people think and say. So, you know, if we're bandying back and forth our differences in values, you know, I would say that the highest possible value is truth, and that one of the concomitants is that we need stringent protection for freedom of speech so that we can utter the truths that we see fit. And I think that that's a value that's much higher than kindness, for example. I mean, there's lots of situations in life where kindness in the immediate present is not the appropriate way to react at all. But so, for example, when you discipline children, you often hurt their feelings in the short term so that they can learn to behave.
Of course it does require effort. Because you don't know it. You have to ask every time. And that's not even a problem. That's not a problem that emerges. You can come up to a person, what are your pronouns, and use them. You can do that if you want to, but that's not the issue. The issue is, and the Peterson had the issue with the Bill C-16, which required by law that you use it. It's not the same as you volunteer and speak with a person, but the law demands you to use the pronoun, and it doesn't matter which pronoun. So you can think of anything you want in your head, and the next day everyone has to use the pronoun. If they don't, you can get them to pay a fine by law. That's ridiculous. If they don't pay a fine, that would be, I think, an escalation on their law. So that's the problem. It's not just, well, just use the pronoun. Well, sure, but that is the limitation of free speech. Because now you cannot talk to people freely because they might think of a pronoun and you have to use it. That's the issue. It's not very hard, of course, but it's not about the difficulty of it. It's about it being introduced as law. So basically the law demands you speak a certain way, which is a limitation on free speech, which is a problem.
Properly.
That's the whole Peterson position,
medium
basically.
to long term, so that their lives go well. And so this automatic assumption that the people on the social justice warrior side of the equation are motivated only by kindness when they're also clearly motivated by power is something I find completely untenable. And I don't think that Pete's solution to program my cell phone so that I can remember what names people need to be called is a reasonable solution at all. We're actually supposed to now use electronic devices to bolster our ability to speak freely in case we offend someone.
That these made-up pronouns, of which there are many, dozens in fact, and there's no consensus on them, and that doesn't even begin to start a discussion about the use of the other.
Yeah, by the way, yeah, his position was he would call if a person, and he never had any issues with trans people in his class or whatever using the wrong pronouns. So yeah, so he never had that issue. The fact that he said that was a dumb law, that was basically the issue people had. But he never actually had any issues or fines because he didn't use a pronoun. So if people just asked to use it, he was fine with it. But if you come up, use this pronoun, bitch, you know, like ego tripping, like you said, then of course it's a problem. Because the law apparently is on their side and you're required to use the ridiculous pronoun. And that's the part with the problem. I find it stupid, yeah, it's like charging people for calling me a twat just because I don't think I'm a twat, but it's really not difficult to use the correct one. Yeah, I can call you an idiot, and you can get offended, and you can think I'm an idiot, and you can choose to not talk to me ever, and that's fine. But when you introduce a law, that's a problem. If you introduce a law in which I cannot call someone an idiot, that's a problem. Because now we don't have free speech. Well, at least part of free speech is gone. Like if I want to call some politician an idiot, I would have the right to do it. I have to critique it. But then imagine one day there's a law, well, you cannot call politicians idiots. Okay then, so you just got limited in your free speech of critiquing a politician. And then you have to maybe think of some other sneaky ways, but that is in itself a limitation of free speech. And that's basically what Peterson had a problem with, and I have a problem with. I'm offended that you think you're not an idiot. How dare you offend me? Yeah, exactly. The offense wars are ridiculous in itself anyway.
Other kin pronouns, and you can look those up if you want, because if you can define your identity subjectively any way you want, then there's absolutely no reason that you can't claim a non-human identity. And you
Beje, čia prieš 5 metus vyko ta diskusija. Dabar realiai netgi didžioji dalis, man atrodo, trans žmonių pritarė, kad neopronouns tie yra tiesiog nesąmonė. Tai iš tikrųjų, ta visa nes ten iki absurdo daėjo, kad ten jau ten suprastų, jeigu būtų jie 3, žinai, kokie daidėm ar panašiai, šitie visi ne problemą neturėtų, bet vat, kai pradėjo eiti tie neopronaunai, kur literally bet kas gali bet ką sugalvoti kiekvieną dieną, ten labai greitai patapo tiesiog absurdu ir net patys trans žmonės, what the fuck would we need this? Tipo, tai, yeah.
Way you want, then there's absolutely no reason that you can't claim a non-human identity, and you may not know, but in the LGBT Rainbow Coalition, there is Q+, and the Q+ people include the other kins who claim a non-human identity, and they're arguing in that Rainbow Coalition that they have the same right to their pronouns that everyone else does, and their pronouns include such things as worm self. You're not supposed to interrupt.
Actually, I was just going to ask if you could go back to the point about the analogy.
Ne, pas mus buvo kol kas tik vienas research streamas, tai apie LGBT, apie homoseksualumą iš esmės.
Between the racial slur and the
I don't think there's any analogy at all.
But
I
that's
think
what
the difference
people want to hear you
I'm
on.
talking about compelled speech. There's a difference between saying that there's something you can't say and saying that there are things that you have to say. And I regard these made-up pronouns, all of them, as the neologisms of radical PC authoritarians. Do you understand that? And I'm not a fan of that sort of person. And the reason I'm not a fan of that sort of person is because I've done my homework. I've read everything I can get my hands on in the development of authoritarian political systems, and I know the literature inside out and backwards. And I am not going to be a mouthpiece for language that I detest. And that's that.
Čia jo tas įžymus, aš tą prisimenu, bet jo, kai jisai kalba apie žodžio laisvę ir tos privalomus dalykus, kuris jis privalo sakyti, jis labai griežtas ir aistringas to buvo ir prieš 5 metus ir dabar.
Who I'm a great admirer of, once described an old religious idea, and that was that God ruled the world with 2 hands, right and left, mercy and justice. And the world couldn't survive if only mercy applied, because then no one would ever be encouraged to adopt the trappings and responsibilities of adulthood. You end up in a situation where you're forgiven for absolutely everything you do or fail to do. You're thrust into the Freudian nightmare of the Oedipal family, where your utter uselessness is forgiven on the grounds of compassion, and you end up living in your mother's basement until you produce fantasies as a consequence of your squelched development of perhaps going out and shooting up a high school. Mercy, in its excess, produces pathology. Justice in its excess produces pathology too, because people are not perfect, and that means that we all fail when we attempt to do the things that we know that we should do. And so being held to account for our failures has to be tempered by mercy, but both principles have to apply. Justice means there's structure and rules, and the people who abide by the structure and play by the rules and move towards the top win. And mercy means we're forgiven our failures so that we can rise up and play again. But you can't have one without the other, because the world falls apart if you do. And this is my problem with tolerance, because tolerant people, first of all, let's say those who proclaim the virtues of tolerance, believe that they're tolerant, but generally that's not the case. They just don't want to accept the responsibility that playing by the rules would bring.
The fuck is this?
And this is a big problem. Like, this is a fatal problem, apart from the fact that it's incoherent and there's no value structure in it, and it's fundamentally divisive and destructive. There's a logical problem with it too that's even worse. And so you might be noticing that the LGBT set of acronyms keeps growing, eh? And it's kind of a form of its own parody in some sense. It's like, well, I'm oppressed. It's like, yeah, you are. And well, I'm oppressed too. Yeah, you're also oppressed. And maybe I'm even oppressing you, being part of this other marginalized group, but at least we share our oppression. Well, I'm also oppressed. Well, so am I. I'm oppressed too. It's like, okay, so here's the problem. There's a big problem here. The problem is, it's true. You're oppressed, you're oppressed, you're oppressed, you're oppressed. God only knows why. Maybe you're too short, or you're not as beautiful as you could be, or you know, your grandparent was a serf, likely, because almost everybody's great-grandparent was. It's like, you know, and you're not as smart as you could be, and you have a sick relative, and you have your own physical problems, and it's like, frankly, you're a mess, and you're oppressed in every part.
Ai, tu čia radai, čia man atrodo nesusiję, žinok, su šituo kanalu, nu, tipo, čia tas LSDP gali belenką reikšti, tipo, čia Lietuvos socialdemokratų partija gali reikšti, tipo, čia tu radai pirmą, ką čia nesusijęs to kanalu greičiausiai buvo. Bet man patinka Petersono kalbėjimo stilius. Kas nustatė, kad negalima pasimti 1-2 minutę pertraukos pokalbio metu apmastyti, kas sakai? Nesupratau šitą. Kas nustatė, kad negalima pasimti pertraukos pokalbio metu apmastyti, kas sakai? Nu, tu prieš kalbant apmastai, ką sakysi, nu, jis čia paskatas veda, tai tu apmastai prieš tai, o ne per vidurį sustoji 2 minutės patyli. Ką tu turi minį?
Possible way, including your ancestry and your bio.
Patinka, kad jis pamasto kalbėdamas, kas yra neįprasta kitiems. Sure. Ok, sure. Nu, jis čia niekur to nedaro. Jis daro kartais, kai interviu užduoda jam klausimą, jis tipo pamasto ten kelias sekundės. Sure.
Biology and the entire sum of human history has conspired to produce victimized you with all your individual pathological problems. It's like, yes, true. Well, so what do you do in the face of that suffering? Try to reduce it. Start with yourself. What good are you? Get yourself together, for Christ's sake, so that when your father dies, you're not whining away in a corner, and you can help plan the funeral, and you can stand up solidly so that people can rely on you. That's better. Don't be a damn victim. Of course you're a victim. Jesus, obviously.
Mes daugiau žiūrėjom, tai mes matėm viską. Aš dabar supratau, ką turėjau menį.
That's how you do it. Well, that's hard. It takes responsibility.
Ir čia mes žiūrim ne tam, mes tuos visus video esame matę, čia maždaug prisiminti ir palyginti su 5 metų prieš 5 metus ir dabar tipo jo retorika maždaug ir jo stilių, intonacija ir panašiai.
There's all these ruined people out there, they've got problems like you can't believe. Off they go to work and do things they don't even like, and look, the lights are on. My God, it's unbelievable. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. And we're so ungrateful. College students, the postmodern types, they're so ungrateful. You know, they don't know that they're surrounded by just a bloody miracle. It's a miracle that all this stuff works, that all you crazy chimpanzees that don't know each other can sit in the same room for 2 hours sweltering away without tearing each other apart, because that's what chimps do. So, with regards to respect, you know, you said, well, human civilization progresses a lot better if we respect one another, and I actually don't believe that at all. I believe that human civilization progresses and maintains itself when we respect people who've earned respect. You don't just respect everybody randomly. Well, what the hell use is respect if you just respect people randomly? It's like inflating the currency, you know? It's like the Simpsons episode where, you know, Bart gets a trophy because it's every child gets a trophy day. All you do is inflate the currency. Respect is actually limited to that category of people who have earned respect in some manner. So whatever you're talking about with regards to, say, common decency between people, it's not respect. And the definitions actually matter. They matter a lot. And so
I hear the respect argument all the time, but you also can't force me to respect you. I mean, you might be able to force me to act like I respect you, but you can't force me to respect you. It's just not possible. There's a complex issue here, which is to what degree do you allow individuals to govern the conversation that's had about them in their presence or otherwise. But I would just revert back to my original argument, which is that's a negotiation. It's either a negotiation. You got 3 states. You can negotiate with someone. You can be their slave, or you can be their tyrant. And I would pick negotiation, but as far as I'm concerned, the law right now, as it's currently instantiated, is a tyrant, and it makes people into its slave, and we're going to pay for that. And it's predicated on, hypothetically, on respect and compassion. I don't buy that for a second. I don't think that's true in the least. And there's a huge literature on compassion. Here's a problem with compassion. Mother grizzly bears are very, very compassionate towards their cubs. But if you get near those cubs, they'll tear you to pieces. And that's the flip side of compassion. And I'm speaking not as a lawyer here, but as a psychologist. That's already well documented. Compassion is by no means an emotion that produces the desired social outcome. Quite the contrary. Quite the contrary. Life is very much more complicated than, well, if you were just empathic, everything would work out. It's like you can't be equally empathic to everyone. And that's a big problem. They basically...
Ok, aš žiūriu, kad čia man reikia į pabaigą, kaip bebūtų, tai mes nežiūrėsim iš naujo video. Man atrodo, yra pakankamai jau, ką mes pažiūrėjom, čia ne viską pažiūrėjau daug. Bet gerai. Pažiūrėjom visai nemažai, tų senesnių video. Ir pažiūrėjom vakar tą naujausią ir keletą naujų šiandien dar pažiūrėjom tipo jo video. Ir pradžioj, prieš viską žiūrint, aš sakiau, kad visai gali būti, kai jis dabar bus, išprotėjęs, tipo, daug labiau išprotėjęs. Ir iš tikrųjų nėra taip smarkiai, man atrodo. Labas ir vankukį. Pagrinde, ką aš matau, kad jisai aistringai labai šnekėjo ir tada. Ypač temų, kurios jam tos svarbios yra. Free speech klausimas, ten to compelled speech klausimas. Netgi tuose 18-17 metų videosuose senesniuose video ir paskaitos netgi jaučiasi jo nemėgimas tos leftistinės ideologijos. Visuose tose kompiliacijose labai jausmas yra, toks, kad jis tarsi tikrai galvoja, kad yra bloga ideologija ir kad jai reikia priešintis ir kad jin prie blogų dalykų priveda. Kas turbūt daug žmonių sutiks, kad tam tikri dalykai tikrai labai questionable ir, ir visuomenė, ką laikas parodė, kad visuomenė ir sutiko su to. Bet, tą pasakius, naujausiam video tikrai jaučiasi, kad dabar toks jausmas, kad viskas yra tų leftistų ideologų kaltė, netgi Ukrainoje karas, ką žiūrėjom tam video. Tai tikrai jaučiasi jo pasistumėjimas ir išaugusi neapykanta tiem žmonėm. Tai tas tikrai jaučiasi. Tai iš tos pusės, tikrai teisybė. Bet ar labai pasikeitė jo ir intonacija, ir kalbėjo būdas, ir tas, bent jau iš tų maždaug video, kur žiūrėjom, gal nelabai, gal šiek tiek, bet nepaskaičiau, kad daug. Nes jis gan griežtai prieš juos pasisakė ir prieš jų tos, siūlomos įstatymus ir panašiai pasisakė ir prieš 5 metus. Bet tada klausimas lieka, mano title klausimas, nuo tvarkos iki chaoso. Ar jis praėjo nuo tos tvarkos savo advokatuojamos iki chaoso? Nesu visai, manau, bet šiek tiek žingsnį dėjo. Nes kai tu pasižiūri tokį dalyką, kaip Putino karas pradėtas, ir tavo, gal ne pirma mintis, bet galų gale video ištransliuotas, kad, žiūrėkit, aš visas turiu teorijas, ir jos yra normalios, bet aš dar turiu savo teoriją 4, kad čia yra jobani leftistai. Tu jau biški esi unhinged toj vietoj, tai jau biški tikrai žengiai į chaoso pusę. Tai jo, žinau, sunku padaryti būtų turbūt tokias išvadas, bet bent jau iš tos retorikos, ką galima pastebėti per 5 metus, turbūt galima taip sakyti, kai jis šiek tiek pasidarė šiek tiek labiau radikalus ir jo neapykanta leftistams tikrai išaugo, bet gal net taip smarkiai, nes tas jautėsi ir anksčiau. Pats jo bendravimo būdas tiek, kiek matėm, ne viską matėm, bet negaliu sakyti, kad drastiškai pasikeitė, kad tai, kai jis šneka su kitais žmonėm, dar ir dabar, tipo, matos, nu, mes nematėm dabar jis kiek su žmonėm kalbas, kurie jam nepritarė. Tai sunku pasakyti. Anksčiau, kai šnekėjau su žmonėm, kur nepritarė, jis gan griežtas buvo. Dabar gal būtų dar griežtesnis, bet mes tokių video daug nematėm, nes dabar jis dažniausiai kur kalba, tai arba monologai, arba tiesiog kalbina kitą žmogų, kuris realiai jo pusėje yra argumento. Bet vieną išvadą tikrai galiu padaryti, kad šitas žmogus neturi būti tildomas, kaip ir turbūt joks kitas ten iš aktyvistų ir politikų, to labiau. Ir čia turbūt didžiausia tragedija ir blogybė, ką gali padaryti the left, tai tildyti žmogų, cancelinti žmogų ir neduoti jam šnekėti. Nes jeigu nori priešintis, ar jeigu nesutinki, turi išklausyti ir tada turi pasakyti savo poziciją ir kodėl jis klysta, o ne uždrausti jam šnekėti. Nes realiai, kai tu Petersono, kai jie maišė su žemėm 5 metus, jis dabar realiai tos visos left pusės tiesiog nekes ir aš net nežinau, ar jis dabar turėtų normalų, ar galėtų neturėti normalų pokalbį su ten. Įsivaizduokim tą paną, kur ant jo ten stumė, tas pats pirmas tas highlight video buvo, kur ten prie jo ir pradėjo apie nacius stumti ant jo. Jis tada dar su gan nemažai kantrybės su jie bendravo. Įdomu, kaip būtų dabar. Aš man atrodo, dabar būtų mažiau kantrybės ir griežtesnis bendravimas su jie. Bet šito galiu tik spekuliuoti, nes, I don't know.